Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about something that I had someone say in the comments the other day, and it specifically involved the above the knee rack pull. It's a perfect example. That's an exercise that I personally consider to be one of the worst exercises ever invented. But the person said, but I saw some results on it. My upper back grew from it, my traps grew from it, therefore how can you say it's a terrible exercise? And I think what people need to remember is that even a bad exercise can cause some stimulation. And when I say something's a really bad exercise, it means that the negatives of the exercise are enough that they outweigh any positives that it brings to the table, and that there's at least 5 other exercises I can think of that would be a much better choice for the exact same goals. Right? So, I mean, that's an example. And we could apply that to anything in life. It's like if someone says, hey, you're saying riding a bicycle from Houston to Dallas is really a bad choice of transportation. Well, I did it once, and I actually made it there. So how can you say that that's a bad option? Well, I would look at them and go, well, yeah, you could get from North Houston to Dallas in a car going 70 miles an hour. You could be there in 4.5 hours. You would have less risk of getting hit. You'd have less risk of heat exhaustion if it's over 100 degrees outside Fahrenheit, in Texas that time of year. You'd have less issues with the weather, the dehydration. Again, and if you're doing it at certain times, you got to think about the fact you'd be driving out oftentimes at night because of the distance of hundreds of miles, and drunk drivers, and the risk of all these problems, right? There's risks associated with it and a big investment. A car would be better. In fact, I would say if you're going to go from North Houston, you could hop over to the airport up there in the north, and they flies to Dallas, and it's like a 45-minute flight. Take you 45 minutes by jet after you check in the airport. You could take a bus. Right, you have a lot of other options that are just simply safer and more effective methods to get from Houston to Dallas, other than riding a bicycle or a skateboard. And that's what I mean by it's a bad exercise. I'm not saying it wouldn't work, just like I'm saying a person could feasibly get from that distance. They could make that trip on a bicycle or skateboard. But it would be because they really love riding a bicycle. It would be one of the worst possible means of transportation. Does it mean it's not a means of transportation? Does it mean it's impossible to do? No. But you wouldn't use that as proof that it's good. So it's the same when you take certain exercises. Let's take something like the above the knee rack pull. What's the downsides? Low training stimulus with a high fatigue. In other words, it's a partial exercise. It works almost any hypertrophy you get from it are through isometrics. Is that saying that isometric training doesn't have its benefits? No, isometrics has some valid uses, particularly for strength and sport-specific carryover, right? We all agree on that, right? I think we all agree. Isometric training in the right context can be very valuable for sport-specific applications for an athlete. I don't think any reasonable coach argues against that. However, is isometrics or pure stretch overload a particularly good method for hypertrophy? No. Can it stimulate hypertrophy? Yes. Usually not the best means. Actually lifting a weight, dynamic movements to where the actual muscle moves are usually superior. And we could say the same thing, you compare something like a deadlift. It actually has, in certain elements, more overall isometric contraction against things like the traps and upper back because there's different angles involved. When people do those above the knee rack pulls, they're just basically standing upright and squatting the weight a few inches. Right? They're not actually getting the full isometric contraction you could get with even half the weight off of the floor off a deadlift for the same muscles. You're missing some of the angles of isometric. Then you deal with the fatigue. It's hard to recover from. Come over to the axial loading end. Even a weak person needs 500 or 600 pounds to get any real effect from that exercise, to get anything. A strong person's going to need 1,000, 1,200, 15 pounds. You start thinking of the axial loading involved, that's a problem, right? Does it mean the exercise doesn't work? No, it means there's a really, really high recovery cost. And if you're trying to train with any sort of appreciable volume to maximize growth, you see the problem there? To maximize muscle growth, we usually need relatively high training volumes. If hypertrophy, like if you were in a hypertrophy specific phase of your training and that is what you're trying to get the most of, your training volume usually needs to be a little higher than it is during something like a strength peaking phase, right? Difference between maybe a block where you're trying to bulk up as much as possible versus a block of training where you're trying to peak for a powerlifting meet for your 1 rep max, or a weightlifting meet for a 1 rep max, right? That's peaking. Usually the volumes are higher during the phases where you're focused on putting the most bulk on. So if you're going to use an exercise like that for size, it limits your training volume due to overall systematic recovery. You're going to be able to train less overall. Well, that's not particularly good for muscle gains. Is it saying that it's not stimulating any muscle growth? No, but it's a pretty bad exercise. Then you factor in all the risk involved. It's an exercise that can injure you. I mean, Jeff Cavalier covered that. It's an exercise that has a high rate of damaging equipment. It damages bars, it damages racks, but mainly bars. It's definitely high on damaging bars. Because you're required to use a much, much larger weight than you would on a lot of other lifts, because you have to load so many plates on there, it's an extra time component. That's the biggest argument against a leg press, right? No one's saying a leg press doesn't stimulate legs, but look how much weight you have to load on a leg press. If you have any base build and you're not just a complete weak person, look how much weight you have to load on a leg press. There's no way a guy who's not blasting gear to just, pump his weight into gaining muscle. There's no way a big guy is going to gain muscle in his legs off 500-600 pounds on a leg press. You got to load a lot of plates on there. You're going to need 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 pounds, and I'm talking even for high rep sets. If you have a respectable strength base built already and you're big already, unless you're just using stuff to make gains. So there's extra side effects right there. There are these other downsides to these exercises. That's a lot of plates to load up. Now, a person might argue, well, I get good conditioning work loading dozens and dozens of plates up and taking them on enough. Okay, well, fine. But is that ideal for your current hypertrophy goals that you're doing the exercise for? So you come over to, again, a lot of these different exercises, but again, we can focus on something like that rack pull above the knee one. And you see the problem there? No one is saying it doesn't cause any stimulation. You can't go, well, I did seem to gain some muscle on it, therefore, how can you say it's bad? I can say it's bad because of all these other factors. There are so many exercises that are better choices for that. Not that I would ever advocate that we stand around worrying about just one little small muscle or trying to isolate it. And granted, I understand that small movements have their place. I do my curls. I do my tricep extensions. You guys know that. But, if you're going to take the time to take an exercise that actually eats into your recovery, it should really bring a lot to the table. I mean, a squat might be hard to recover from, but a squat brings a lot to the table. It brings an enormous amount to the table in terms of overall size, overall strength, carry over to sports. Right? It brings a lot to the table to go with that negative effect on recovery. Something like a rack pull doesn't. And that's the thing. Anytime that we are picking out an exercise for, let's say, the purpose of bringing up a weak link, you say your traps are small, your upper back, or your bicep, or whatever, and you need to throw a specialized exercise at it, most of the time, that means that we pick an exercise that has the least negative effects on our overall recovery. Why? Because we have a muscle group that our overall training isn't getting enough volume at, and we're probably training with a pretty large amount of training fatigue that affects our recovery. So for more specialized growth areas, the last thing you want to do is throw an exercise that just destroys and beats up your recovery further. Because that means everything has to be reduced to compensate. So usually we're going in the opposite direction. we're usually looking at what's an exercise that I can hypertrophy this weak link with that has the least negative effects on my systematic recovery. And leg exercises like that are the exact opposite direction you want to go. So we come back over to the point of just using that as one example of a lot of different things we could discuss. Just because an exercise can give results, or you got some results doing it, doesn't make it a good exercise even for the purpose that you're doing it for. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.